The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things and see that there might be another way to look at it that you have not been shown.
Peace and revolutionary blessings to everyone. Welcome to the Right Authority Podcast. I am your distributor of information, Brother Carr, also known as the KCOG. The purpose of this program is to dismantle white supremacy. If you do not understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything and anything you understand will only confuse you. That is a quote from Neely Fuller Jr., and we're going to kick everything off today with an example of what white supremacy really is. I've mentioned to you guys in the past that white supremacy is a system. Okay, today we're going to look at part of that system. We're going to look at the media, politics, that includes foreign policy and immigration. Okay, first thing we're going to do is take a look at the media. I have been reporting that the media is a propaganda machine, and it is used to brainwash you to believe things that are totally untrue. Okay? So the very first part of this that we have to deal with is what the media is not telling you in mainstream media. All your mainstream programs, CNN, Headline News, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, the entire gamut of news, what they are not showing you, okay? Before I go there, a lot of people need to really do a little homework about the Ukraine. I strongly suggest that you Google the Ukraine and check out how the government operates. One of the things you will see is the Ukraine is not a democracy. Repeat, the Ukraine is not a democracy. Okay? And one of the interesting taglines that you're not hearing during this Ukraine-Russia conflict is the U.S. of A., the good old United States, being involved in this to bring democracy. That's what you're missing. They're not saying that. Well, there's a reason they're not saying that. Okay? Google the Ukraine. You will see that they have a central government that creates or pretty much dictates the policies, and then they pass that down to their parliament to execute the policies. Okay? You will also hear a little bit tonight about the current president of the Ukraine, Zelensky, and how he came to power. And there are some very similar things between his career in the Ukraine and the rise to power of Trump here in the United States. So we're going to take a look at that. And do keep in mind, we're going to show you through the media, through politics, foreign policy, and immigration, how white supremacy works. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get you a little truth out there about the Ukraine and its government. We're going to start with a piece called "The Cover-Up in the Ukraine Is Getting Worse." Okay? This piece is being presented by online media called Redacted with host Clayton Morris. Now, I need to let you guys know that Clayton Morris used to be with Fox News. In fact, he used to host the weekend program on Fox News called Fox and Friends. Around 2019, he left to start his real estate empire, which he had some success in. And for whatever reason, he decided to come back into the news business with this online program that you can catch on YouTube called Redacted. And generally, he is co-hosting with his wife. But in this particular piece, he's pretty much holding his own. And this piece aired on April 30th, 2022. And with that, I want you to listen. And again, the cover-up in the Ukraine is getting worse, is the name of his report. Here we go.
Noticed provision was hidden inside of a 2,232-page government spending bill. They're very large. No wonder it was ignored. Who's reading this? Because the military-industrial complex runs Congress, and military spending bills are often ignored in the media and on Capitol Hill because everyone falls in line, lockstep, and they pass these weapons bills. No one asks any questions. But on this day, in 2018, there was an anomaly. Something didn't go as planned. What was the reason? Well, you see, this little simple paragraph was slipped into the bill. Yes, a tiny little paragraph that had incredibly profound consequences. It actually passed and was approved by Congress. But this isn't the first time. This little paragraph was included in 3 previous spending bills since 2015. This little paragraph tried to make its way into the spending bill by some brave members of Congress. Each time, though, it was removed, deleted, but not this time. You see, since 2015 and the overthrow of the Ukrainian government and the installation of a puppet regime, the United States government had been funneling millions of dollars in weapons to the Ukrainian military under the guise of protection. So for 3 years, and each of these spending bills as they came to the table, there was a tiny paragraph that was included, but it kept getting removed and deleted. But on March 28th of 2018, that paragraph somehow managed to make it through and passed Congress. It was included in the $1.3 trillion spending bill. So what did this paragraph say? Here it is. It said, quote, "None of the funds made available by this act may be used to provide arms, training, or other assistance to the Azov battalion." Yes, Congress had to include a paragraph that made sure all of these weapons were not getting into the hands of neo-Nazi-led Azov battalion in Ukraine. But there's just one problem, as we've reported on here in this show. It was well known at the time that the Azov battalion wasn't some fringe group made up of only a few people. No, in fact, the neo-Nazi Azov battalion and their soldiers were a major part of the entire Ukrainian military at every level. Again, not just some fringe battalion made up of volunteers. In fact, Congressman Ro Khanna, who serves the 17th District of California, was outspoken at the time, was one of the few congressional voices actually pushing to make sure that the American tax dollars weren't going to Nazis. Quote, "White supremacy and neo-Nazism are unacceptable and have no place in our world. I'm very pleased that the recently passed omnibus spending bill prevents the United States from providing arms and training assistance to the neo-Nazi Azov battalion fighting in Ukraine," end quote. Congress had been trying to get this paragraph in the spending bill since 2015, but we all remember what happened in 2015. If you need a refresher, here it is. U.S. senators traveling to Ukraine, meeting with the Ukrainian paramilitary, telling them that we are going to be sending lots of weapons to you. Here they are.
2017 will be the year of offense.
That is McCain and Lindsey Graham, both Republicans.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
So to be clear, starting just after that visit, Congress removed this paragraph about money and weapons going to Nazis 3 different times. They removed this paragraph. They went in and cut it 3 times. Imagine being the congressman who did that. Like, hey, honey, how was your day at work today? What'd you do? Well, I went into a spending bill and, we continue to funnel money to Nazis, and I removed a paragraph that would have stopped us from doing that. You did, honey? So, wait a minute, you're still sending money to Nazis? Yeah. What's for dinner? In 2017, the Azov Battalion posted videos showing their soldiers in Ukraine using US-made grenade launchers. Those videos were later removed, and the Ukrainian National Guard issued a statement saying, all good here, nothing to see. We made sure those grenade launchers were not in the possession of the Azov Battalion any longer. Okay, nothing to see. All good, right? In 2018, U.S. military leaders were caught meeting with the neo-Nazi group in Ukraine.
That is during the Trump administration.
U.S. military leader on the left of your screen, Nazis on the right of your screen. Of course, this begs the question, why would Congress have to put a paragraph like this in their spending bill anyway? After all, tens of thousands of Americans lost their lives fighting Nazis to liberate Europe in World War II. Wouldn't we already have something on the books, something like some sort of a law? A vetting process, perhaps, that keeps the United States from sending money and weapons to white supremacists, neo-Nazis? And the answer actually is yes, we do. It's called the Leahy Law, named after Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy. And it prevents the United States from sending aid to any group that the Secretary of State has credible information that such a unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. So if you're on this human rights violation list, you don't get money from the United States Congress. Kind of. So we are not allowed to send money and weapons and other aid to groups that the Secretary of State's office has already deemed violators of human rights, which of course brings up the next question. Did the Secretary of State's office at the time already recognize the Ukrainian military Azov Battalion as violators of human rights? And the answer actually may surprise you. The answer is no. Not officially, in fact. In fact, in 2018, their report, which you can very easily access on the State Department's website right now if you like, you'll see that most of eastern Ukraine is exempted from their human rights violation report in an area heavily controlled by the Azov Battalion. But interestingly, the State Department did recognize that the Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, is known to torture, disappear individuals, arbitrary detention without due process, and other human rights violations are committed by the SBU. They are also responsible for the 2014 Maidan shootings in Kyiv. And they also are the very people that, regardless of the Azov Battalion, continue to receive money and support from the United States government. Also, this same group, the SBU, is responsible for grabbing Gonzalo Lira, journalist Gonzalo Lira, who had been reporting on the corrupt Zelensky regime. The SBU took him against his will, held him for 7 days, forced him to sign a non-disclosure agreement to silence him. But we continue to send money to them. Now, you would think with this new provision added to this omnibus spending bill that the money and the weapons would stop flowing to Ukraine, knowing that they're being run by neo-Nazis. All the money and weapons would stop. But the money and the weapons continue to flow to these Nazis. And there was growing concern from some members of Congress at the time that they were actively recruiting American soldiers to join their ranks in Ukraine. In fact, in October of 2019, a full 1 year after Congress said that we're no longer going to send money to these neo-Nazi groups, Max Rose, who chaired the counterterrorism subcommittee at the time, submitted a letter to the State Department co-signed by 39 members of Congress. It urged, among other things, for the department to designate the Azov Battalion as a terrorist organization in the same fashion as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Interestingly, that letter has been deleted from the internet. It's hard to find. In that letter, that quote, the Azov movement has been recruiting, radicalizing, and training American citizens for years. Of course, the common refrain today from people who are looking to cover the story up is that simply the Azov Battalion is a small group of fringe Nazis. They don't represent the larger Ukrainian military, but that's wrong. In fact, Foreign Policy magazine, which would love nothing more than a full-blown war with Russia, wrote at the time, in October of 2019, in a piece criticizing Max Rose. They wrote this, quote, the Azov Battalion was founded in 2014 to help defend Ukraine against Russian-led proxy forces. It also quickly became known as a place where foreign far-right extremists could make themselves at home. Almost 6 years later, Azov has expanded into a multi-pronged movement with a political party, a street militia, and dozens of affiliated smaller organizations. The military unit is now under the auspices of Ukraine's National Guard and properly known as the Azov Regiment. It's why in Rose's letter referring to the Azov as simply the Azov Battalion is not only technically incorrect, but displays a lack of understanding about the movement itself. So let's get this right. In Foreign Policy magazine, in their attempt to discredit Congresswoman Rose's letter, they actually unwittingly revealed the size and the scope of the Nazi group, that it wasn't some small fringe group. It's a political movement. It's a street militia. It's a full-fledged regiment, actively recruiting other foreign extremists, and yes, from the United States and the United Kingdom. But we've been reporting on this show that the U.S. is continuing to funnel money and weapons to the Azov Battalion. And now we have our first confirmed American soldier killed in Ukraine. The truth is coming out, guys. And the United...
Truly amazing. That is a real news report, guys. Let me just also back up and explain the start of this conflict, because the United States and NATO could have easily avoided this entire conflict, but they chose not to. Okay? For those that are under 50 years of age, you might want to Google the Cuban Missile Crisis that under the Kennedy administration in the 1960s. Now, I want you to Google that because that's going to give you the best example as to what's happening now with Russia, okay? Now, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the then USSR tried to install nuclear missiles into Cuba. Now, if you understand the proximity of Cuba to the United States, it's only 90 miles off the Florida coast. The United States and the Kennedy administration told Khrushchev, no, you're not putting missiles that close to our borders. You're not doing it. And that was a stalled talks for a while. In fact, they call it a Mexican standoff, and then Khrushchev blinked. Khrushchev decided to not send the missiles into Cuba, and he turned around his warships carrying the missiles, and they left Cuban waters and went back to Russia. Now, with that said, the same thing is happening at Russia's border right now. The Ukraine wants to join NATO. NATO has been if you remember the Cold War and the USSR and all that, NATO has been an enemy of now Russia since the Cold War. So the Ukraine wants to join NATO. Now understand, if you Google the Soviet or Russia and the Ukraine or the old Soviet bloc, you'll see that Ukraine sits right at Russia's southern border. Okay? Now, if the Ukraine joins NATO, that will allow NATO forces to go into the Ukraine like they are in Poland. Poland is on the border of the northwest of the Ukraine and on the western border of Russia. Okay? NATO forces can be in Poland. Poland is a NATO nation. The Ukraine is not. And what Russia is saying, that's as far as you guys are going. You're not going any farther on our borders. Okay? Now, the U.S. and NATO could have easily avoided this conflict just by going back to the Ukraine and telling Zelensky, you got to come up with another plan. This one's going to be too messy. It may lead to a third world war. No, we're not going to allow you to join NATO. At this point, let's keep the peace. But that's not what's driving this whole thing. You must understand this. What's driving this whole thing in the politics and the foreign policy of the United States is the military-industrial complex. Okay? These people are making money. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all the other big companies that are involved in this, and there's a lot of them. So these companies are allowed to make money because the U.S. Congress will spend our tax dollars to pay the military-industrial complex to build and ship these weapons. Okay? Now, the next thing you need to understand that when you hear about military intervention and war, I want you to start thinking dollar signs because that's what's really going on. It's about making money. All right? Now, you're probably wondering how U.S. congressmen and the president can make money off of the military-industrial complex. Well, they make money in several ways. Some of these people have holdings in these companies. Okay? They literally have stock holdings in these companies. Or they're invested in something called the stock market index, the U.S. stock market index, which includes the 500 top companies here in the United States. And of that, all the military-industrial complex companies are a part of the 500 top companies in this nation. They also make money through the lobby, particularly Congress. Now, you have to have a clear understanding of this to understand what exactly the U.S. is doing and why they are doing what they're doing. Okay? The next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at Zelensky himself. At the top of the program, I told you there were some similarities in the way that Zelensky came to power. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and look at that. And I want you guys to note that this is Gravitas Plus, the story of the Ukraine president, Volodymry Zelensky. And this was aired on YouTube on March 27, 2022, so not long ago. And this will give you an idea of Zelensky itself and the type of government. And before I start this, do keep in mind, in 2014, during the Obama administration, when U.S. forces went in and outed Viktor Yanukovych, outed him and installed Pedro Portion, who was the predecessor to Zelensky. Zelensky took over, won the election in 2019 and took over as president behind him. But do keep in mind, it was the U.S. that went in 2014, and you heard that in the report from Clayton Morris, that went in and literally kicked that president out and installed a new president in the Ukraine. So you're beginning to see that the Ukraine is a puppet government of the United States, as well as being neo-Nazis, which under the Obama administration, you have to scratch your head why Obama would allow support for a country with neo-Nazi ties. But let's go ahead and get into Zelensky.
How much do you know about Volodymry Zelensky? He's the president of Ukraine. The West is drawing parallels between him and the Chinese student who stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square in 1989. They say, like him, Zelensky too is standing up to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Volodymyr Zelensky has become the most admired person of the free world. His Legos are being sold. There is Zelensky merchandise. So much is being written about him, but mostly by the West. So far, we've seen Zelensky through the Western lens, one that sees Putin as the villain and Zelensky as the hero. Putin, the man who tags polar bears, and Zelensky, the president who dances to cha-cha. Putin is cold, Zelensky is funny. Putin barely talks about his family, Zelensky shares photos of his wife and children. Ever since the war in Ukraine broke out, the West has presented Zelensky as the antithesis of Putin, basically the good guy in this story. But this is the West's story. Let's look at Zelensky independent of the story. Who is he? Some say, like Putin, Zelensky too has authoritarian traits. Volodymyr Zelensky is 44 years old. He grew up in a town called Kryvyi Rih. This is where it's located on the map. Zelensky's father was a computer science professor. His mother was an engineer. He grew up in one of the better neighborhoods of the town. While the young men of Kryvyi Rih wore tracksuits, Zelensky wore classy suits. He liked English rock. He played the guitar. Even shared a pair of blue jeans with his friend, Alexander Pikalov. The denim would go back and forth between the two, depending on who had a date. So goes the story. The Soviet Union, though, collapsed when Zelensky was growing up. The post-Soviet era gave him the chance to mock politicians in broad daylight. A comedy show sprung up on Russian TV called KVN. It pit teams from across former Soviet states against one another. At 17, Zelensky became part of the team representing Kryvyi Rih. Soon, he and his friends created their own troupe. It was named the 95th Quarter, or Quartal 95. Critics say Zelensky's comedy was quote-unquote puerile, vulgar and working class. It is said that Zelensky's mother once visited the rehearsal. She was not happy with what she saw. The distressed woman would pull Zelensky's friend aside and ask, "He's going to be a lawyer, isn't he?" Zelensky did go on to study law, but he built a career in comedy. Back in those days, oligarchs would often invite comics and satirists to their parties. Zelensky was invited to perform at Viktor Yanukovych's birthday party. We are talking about the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was ousted in the Euromaidan revolution of 2014. Did Zelensky perform before Yanukovych? Reports say he did. When Crimea was annexed in 2014, Zelensky declared he did not want anything to do with Russia. His troop cut all ties with the Russian market. It also donated 1 million hryvnia to the Ukrainian army. Not only was he a successful comic, but also Ukraine's most successful producer. He had a fancy office in Kiev with a panoramic view of the city. He bought a 15-room villa in Tuscany, one that he never declared during his presidential campaign. By 2012, long before Crimea happened, Zelensky was sitting on some $15 million. He did not lose much by cutting off ties with Russia, but he made immense gains in terms of his popularity. Soon, Zelensky started work on his most successful show, a sitcom called Servant of the People. He played a high school teacher named Goloborodko, who was caught on tape ranting about corruption, and this monologue goes viral, and the teacher becomes president. Goloborodko sets out to chart his own path. He surrounds himself with old friends instead of the old ruling class. He appoints inexperienced people to office. Turns out all of this could have been a campaign announcement spread over 3 seasons. The show ran from 2015 to 2019. In the final hours of 2018, Zelensky announced that he would run for office. He had no experience, but two big promises.
Sound familiar?
One, he would fight corruption and confront Ukraine's
Sounds
oligarchs.
familiar?
And two, he would end the war in Donbass. Zelensky declared, "You don't need experience to be president. You just need to be a decent human being."
Sounds familiar?
Volodymyr Zelensky is a native Russian speaker. His career as comic was all about depicting past presidents in a bad light, be it Viktor Yushchenko, Viktor Yanukovych, or Petro Poroshenko. Zelensky promised to be nothing like them. He projected himself as the total alternative to these presidents. 73% of Ukrainian voters put their weight behind him. He assumed office on the 2nd of May 2019. Just like Goloborodko, Zelensky installed friends in high offices, be it his writing partners, the head of his production company, or his lawyer. They were all made part of the government. And here we are, 3 years later. The war in Donbass is not ended. Instead, it has escalated into Europe's biggest crisis since World War II. About 1,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine alone. More than 1,500 people have been injured. At least 3 million people have fled Ukraine. Zelensky failed to keep his promise, and he could not have failed in a worse way. But he did rise to the crisis. When the US offered to fly him out of Ukraine, Zelensky said, "I need ammo, not a ride." The president appears on TV every day, and every day he's wearing a sap green t-shirt. He's visibly exhausted and mostly unshaved. On the 6th day of the war, Zelensky addressed the European Parliament via a video link. "Do prove that you're with us," he said. His interpreter appeared to choke on his tears. "Do prove that you will not let us go," Zelensky continued. One observer later noted it was as if Charlie Chaplin had morphed into Winston Churchill. You see, this man knows TV. He is pulling off what Putin had during the Chechen war. The daily press appearances, videos from war zones, sharing meals with troops, addressing parliaments around the world, and all of this is working. Zelensky has become the most popular politician in the US, more popular than even US President Joe Biden. How tough should that be, you could ask? Zelensky knows how to win people over. He knows gimmicks. After he became president, he appointed his press secretary through an open competition. There were 4,000 candidates, and each of them were tested on their sense of humor and tolerance for stress. Zelensky also likes theatrics. He announced his election bid on live television on New Year's Eve. He once held a 14-hour-long press conference at a food market. Here's something he does not like: comedy at his expense. If comic Zelensky were to look at President Zelensky today, he would get a lot of fodder for his scripts. 1. The president has not been able to weed out corruption. 2. The Pandora Papers have exposed Zelensky's murky businesses. Volodymyr Zelensky has offshore holdings, his own companies in British Virgin Islands, Cyprus, and Belize. His team says Zelensky is quote-unquote like any other business person in Ukraine, but you don't get to be both, a businessman and a statesman. 3. Zelensky has also displayed authoritarian traits. He has banned 3 TV stations in Ukraine. Observers say, just like Putin, Zelensky too may be seizing power from the oligarchs only to strengthen his own personal authority
TikTok?
And advance his interests. In 2020, Zelensky dismissed a general prosecutor because he reportedly refused to pursue cases that helped the president's cause. A governor of a national bank was removed too because he was not loyal enough. The deputy governor too was removed because she had raised concerns about the bank's independence. 4. Zelensky has failed to deliver his biggest campaign promise. There is no peace in Donbass. The region has now been taken over by Russian forces. 5. Zelensky may have underplayed warnings of the war. He first accused the West of hurting Ukraine's morale. Then he decided to spook the world. He said Russia would attack on the 16th of February. Later, he said he was only quoting media reports. Today, Zelensky spends his days in bunkers, cheering his forces, appearing on TV every now and then. He's the only Ukrainian president to face a full-fledged invasion. He has the support of his voters. His approval ratings are at an all-time high. There is obviously a threat to his life. Zelensky, after all, is reportedly Russia's target number 1. He's often heard telling global leaders that this might be the last time you see me alive. And every time a parliament applauds Zelensky, he says, "Thank you, but we want you to do more."
Now, that should give you an idea on who the Ukraine president is and how he came to power. And we're going to now turn our attention to the last piece. Now, keep in mind, we looked at media, and how the mainstream media is not telling you the truth about what's going on with the Ukraine. We looked at politics and foreign policy, how the U.S. created this conflict because they could have easily avoided it and they chose not to. We looked at why they created this conflict as well, because the Ukraine is a puppet government set up by the Bush administration and supported by the U.S. Congress, which is both Republicans and Democrats. This carried over into the Trump administration, and they continue to fund the Ukraine and their anti-Nazi regime in the Ukraine. Now we're going to take a look, and that's the foreign policy. The other part of it making of the reason why they did this, of course, is to make money, because the military-industrial complex will make money behind this because they are the ones producing the arms, which the U.S. Congress will use our tax dollars and pay them to produce these arms, and then the U.S. will ship them over to the Ukraine, along with U.S. personnel to train them on how to use the arms, okay, as well as having the contract to do things like replacement parts, more ammo if they need it, and things of like that. All this is built into the contracts that will make money for the military-industrial complex. I also explained to you how Congress and the president can get their cut of this through investments. Now, the last piece we're going to look at here today is the immigration. And this, again, is an example of how white supremacy works. Okay? You have to understand. I'm laying it out for you. I can't use a better example than this particular conflict in order to show you the pieces and how it all comes together. Okay? So what I'm going to do in the next piece here is I'm going to show you two things. You might remember in August of 2021, Haiti was hit with an earthquake that rocked southwest Haiti. 2 days later, Tropical Depression Grace also hit Haiti. Okay? So that is two natural disasters that hit Haiti in less than 2 days. Okay? This created a lot of refugees. All right. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is photos of the Haitian refugees as they tried to cross the Rio Grande River from Mexico into Del Rio, Texas. Okay. Now, you can see photos from the Texas border show the desperation of thousands of Haitians at a makeshift camp. Keep that in mind. A makeshift camp. This was posted September 21st, 2021. Don't forget the two natural disasters hit a month before on August 14th and then on August 16th. 14th was the earthquake, and Tropical Storm Grace hit on the 16th. Natural disasters. These folks left Cuba, got into Mexico, came up through Mexico to the U.S.-Mexican border on the Rio Grande and crossed into Del Rio, Texas. Let's take a look. First of all, this is the makeshift camp under the Del Rio International Bridge. Okay, and if that bridge crosses from Mexico into the United States, okay, you can see the Rio Grande in the background there. This is the makeshift camp of Haitians now. We're talking immigration. Okay. After they got into Del Rio, Texas, there was no support from the U.S. government for these people. Keep in mind, they were hit with 2 natural disasters in 2 days, 1 month before they showed up here. They had to cross the Rio Grande back into Mexico in order to buy food. And you might remember these images of the U.S. Custom Control using their reins. I'm sorry, it just came to me. Their reins of their horses to whip these Haitian refugees back into the camp. Now, again, the U.S. wouldn't even provide shelter or food for these refugees. We just held them at the border. This is them coming out of the river onto shore. You see them going through all the mud. And you can see here where he's swimming back across to get supplies to bring back to the U.S. side. Here's an aerial view of the shanty town that was makeshift camp that they were in under the Del Rio International Bridge. And again, you can see them going back and forth. And here you can see clearly the U.S. border control. You can see the Rio Grande here, and you can see the Haitians coming across here. What they're trying to do is make sure they don't come into the United States, and the guys on horseback are making sure they stay into the makeshift camps. Okay? You see this. Again, he's coming back with supplies, and on the other side you see in front of him is the U.S. Border Patrol. And here you get a better idea of what the camp looks like as they cross to get supplies to go back into the United States. So you see, that's what they did. We didn't even provide supplies for them. Here you see them on the Mexico side of the border actually buying these supplies so they can go back to the other side of the border, to the U.S. side of the border, and go into the camp. And you can see clearly the U.S. Border Control is there to make sure they go no farther. Then, at the end, they put them all on buses, shipped them all to Del Rio's airport, and loaded them on Air Force cargo planes and took them back to Haiti. All right? You guys are seeing this, right? Now, we're going to take a look at what happened when the Ukrainians arrived at the U.S.-Mexican border. This was April 13th, 2022. This is a little bit before the natural disaster in Haiti. So, or after the national disaster in Haiti. This is like 6, 7, 8 months later. And you can already see a stark difference. This is in Tijuana, before they crossed over into San Diego. All right. You can see that they were given nice buses But these buses took them into San Diego. And look how they were housed in Tijuana. Beats better than sleeping under a bridge outside, right? With the Texas Border Patrol riding roughshod over you. Notice no problem with the U.S. border. This is immigration. And this is tied into a direct piece where President Biden announced a week ago that he would open the borders to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. Okay? He just made the announcement last week. He also announced that he was going to send another $33 billion in arms and military aid to Ukraine. Now, do keep in mind, folks, the president just can't send that money to the Ukraine without the approval of Congress. So this is the entire U.S. government, not just Biden, but the entire U.S. government. Look at this. Stark difference between how the refugees from Haiti were treated versus the refugees from the Ukraine. Look at this. In this picture behind him, you can see they even have cots, beds, sliding board, play areas. Are y'all beginning to get the picture here? Look at this. She's wearing a U.S. shirt. Where does she get that from? Look at this. Look at how they're being treated. Where's the police? Where's the U.S. Border Patrol? All right. Now next, we're going to take a look at how President Biden himself greeted the Ukrainian refugees in Poland, where he made the announcement about opening the borders to 100,000 refugees and sending another $33 billion in aid to the Ukraine. Now, he made no such trip to Haiti that got hit with two natural disasters in less than 2 days. And with that, I'm going to turn you guys on to the last piece that I want you to hear. This piece is going to be provided to you by Jacqueline Luqman of Luqman Nation and By Any Means Necessary. The Ukrainian refugees programs as racist as you think it is. This aired April 30th, 2022 on the Black Power Media Network. Again, this is Jacqueline Luqman.
Ukrainian refugees fleeing that U.S. NATO imperialist war-ravaged country. All U.S. citizens can submit an application through the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, to sponsor Ukrainian refugees, and the requirements for refugees are that they must have been residents of Ukraine as of February 11th, when the war started, have a valid passport, pass security checks, and complete required vaccinations. All those who are sponsored are automatically eligible for work authorization. This program is another piece of the USCIS humanitarian parole program, whereby people who the U.S. would otherwise probably not allow into the country are given temporary admission due to urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. That's what they say on their website. Now, I think the use of the word parole is weird. I'm not sure what part of seeking refuge and asylum is considered criminal as to name the process for granting temporary immigration approval for humanitarian reasons parole. But it feels like CIS is saying, how dare these people commit the crime of wanting to come to this country, especially after U.S. policy contributed to the destabilization of theirs. But I digress, because programs to sponsor refugees from other countries do already exist, but they are different from this new one established for Ukrainian refugees. Now, the existing programs are the Haitian Family Reunification Parole Program, the Cuban Family Reunification Parole Program, the Central American Minors Refugee and Parole Program, discretionary options for military members, enlistees, and their families, the Filipino World War II Veterans Parole Program, and the International Entrepreneur Parole Program. Now, the requirements for the options for military members, enlistees, and their families is directed at non-citizen, current and former military service members and qualifying family members of current and former military service members. The Filipino World War II Veterans Parole Program is limited to Filipino World War II veterans and their U.S. citizen and lawful permanent resident spouses to apply for parole for certain family members. But if you're like me, you definitely wonder how people could enlist in the U.S. military and serve, but still have to apply for citizenship. But that's America for you. Use you up to fight the battles of the empire, then tell you you're not good enough to live in it. And then the International Entrepreneur Parole Program it's just a way for foreign businesses and the foreign business class to be allowed to live in the U.S. and make money for the U.S. The requirement says their stay in the U.S. has to provide a significant public benefit, but you and I know what they mean is how the U.S. government would benefit. But I digress again because my focus is on those programs for refugees seeking parole from particular countries. The one thing the programs for Haitian, Cuban, and Central American minors have in common is that the applicant, that is, the person living in the U.S. who is seeking to receive refugees from those countries, have to be related to the persons they're applying to host. But that's pretty much where any commonality ends. All of the requirements are different for each program, and some of the information is really just confusing and hard to understand. And honestly, that's the first thing that raised my inequality alarm. Why does an immigration program, any immigration program, have to be different from requirements for other countries? And if they are different, what's the justification for the difference in requirements between countries? Now, I didn't check every single link, but the requirements for the Haitian and Central American Minors Program are way more complex than for the Cuban program. And, well, come on, you know why that is. Then the fees for the Haitian program are listed right on the webpage for that program. And as you guessed, they ain't cheap. $2,210 for each person being applied for if the application is through the humanitarian program, but around $660 if the process begins through an immigrant visa. But there's no fee schedule listed on the Cuban program requirements page, even though there are links to a fee schedule where people can find out what their fees are depending on what forms they have to fill out. Is it me, or is it weird to list the fees for the program for Haitians right up front, but not for any other program? Seems sketchy, but I'm trying to chalk this up to bad web design and not, blatant racism, hoping that people won't apply for the program for their Haitian family members when they see how much they have to pay per person. And then the Central American Minors Program has no fees associated with the application that I could find through all the links. Probably do have fees, but they're hard to find. But they do require DNA testing for applicants applying for minor children. Nobody is testing Cubans to prove the people they're applying to host are relatives of them, though. But Biden's program for Ukrainian refugees, that's real simple. Ukrainian refugees have to have a valid passport. They have to have lived in Ukraine as of February 11th. They have to have a supporter in the U.S. who can prove that they can financially support them for up to 2 years. That person doesn't even have to be a relative, and that's pretty much it. The U.S. is responsible for the chaos it created in Ukraine, absolutely. But it is also responsible for similar chaos that this government has created in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Haiti, Somalia, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Libya. But it hasn't extended an immigration program like the one just made up from whole cloth for Ukrainians, for any of those people. And you know why that is. Follow Luqman Nation on patreon.com/Luqman Nation for lots of great content.
I'd like to thank Jackie Luqman for that presentation, and that covers the immigration piece of how white supremacy works. Now, sorry about that, guys. I've been doing this series, and I want you guys to go in and take a look at the series that I've been doing so that you have an understanding, because the whole purpose of this is to show you how they brainwash a nation, okay? And this has been something that's been ongoing for a while. So I want to do two things. I want to take you to my website so you can go in and take a look at this on your own. And I'm going to take you down to a couple of, this is under my podcast. And there's more here. I just gotta, okay, load it all in here. Here we go. I want you to go back and start here on how to brainwash a nation in 4 steps and what is critical race theory. Yuri Bezmenov, a USSR deflector, came to the United States back in the 1970s. In 1985, he did a series of interviews on how the USSR actually goes in and destabilize a nation, okay? And what he says is that they do that by brainwashing the nation in 4 steps. And then from there, we go into brainwash a nation in 4 steps, part 2, and we start with the first part of that, which is demoralization and what that process entails. Then we go into part 3 with destabilization, and then we wrap up with part 4 with crisis and normalization. Now, if you check out those 4 series alone, you'll hear a lot of great information, especially on how they use the educational system to demoralize the nation, and about the time frame that this whole process started, which lines up perfectly from his interview in 1985. So I strongly suggest you go in and listen. Now, these are podcasts. Okay? And again, it starts with how to brainwash a nation. You see the blue brain here. And what is critical race theory? Because a lot of people got critical race theory twisted upside down. They do not understand what it is because you had an idiot by the name Marjorie Taylor Greene put this stuff into the Republican talking points about critical race theory. And they're controlling two things. This is white supremacy 101, guys, if you want to really understand what it is and how it works. This is white supremacy 101. They first of all take things, twist it, and put a different spin on it, and then sell it to you through the media. And that's what they did with critical race theory, okay? Also, you will hear how they use the educational system, because the one thing you heard from the Republican blowback is they do not want to teach their kids that they were bad people. Okay. Even though their ancestors, and that is true, it is very true in American history that their ancestors were very bad people, but they don't want to traumatize their kids with that. Yet and still, we allow the American educational system to traumatize our kids with slavery. Are you beginning to see the power of white supremacy? They don't want to traumatize their children, but don't mind traumatizing our kids, telling them that their ancestors came here as slaves. That is incorrect. Their ancestor came here as African people who were enslaved. That's the real history and what should be taught to our children. We came here as African people and were enslaved. Now, going again to demoralization, step 1, how to brainwash a nation in 4 steps. You can see us going down the rabbit hole here. You want to check that out. Keep in mind these are podcasts. And then coming back to the real deal, the destabilization. Just look for the dollar bills, y'all, on this one. Brainwash a Nation, Part 3, Destabilization. It's all about the economy, war, and foreign policy. You'll learn a lot on this one. You will also hear a little bit from some very powerful people in education and how they use education to literally dumb down our kids. That's from Charlotte Elizabeth, who was part of the Department of Education Research and Development Team for Education, okay? And a Washington insider. Her father was a member of Skull and Bones and left her on his deathbed, gave her the Skull and Bone Registry. This is real stuff, guys. And she talks about this. So this is a very powerful woman. And when she's talking about education, she's talking about it from the inside of the system. You're only going to get that information if you go here, Brainwash a Nation in 4 steps, Part 2, Demoralization. You'll hear again in Step 3, Destabilization, how they use the economy, foreign policy, and war to destabilize the nation. And of course, you'll also hear how they use our civil rights and Black Power movement to help with the process of destabilizing the nation. Sorry to say that, but it's true. They did do that. And then in Step 4, Brainwash a Nation, in 4 steps, Step 4, you'll hear about the crisis and normalization. Here you will see very clearly that the Black community has already been normalized. The process has been completed. They have completely brainwashed the Black community. And if you've seen any of my posts, you have seen me post, we do not know who we are. That's because of this process that has taken place since Brown versus the Board of Topeka and the educational system, and how it was used to brainwash an entire generation of African American people, of black folks. Did the same on white folks, but on a different level. But you won't get that information unless you go in and hear this information right here. From there, I will take you to Brainwash and Explain. This was some work that I recorded from Joel Dempsdale of San Diego, USC San Diego, as he reviews his book, Dark Persuasion, where he tells the history of brainwashing and how Pavlov in Russia actually came up with the concept. You can only hear that here. This is a podcast, okay? And then there were some things that I continue on the process, but I had to switch over to video because there was so much that I had to show you concerning this. So then hit the video there and go over to make sure I'm at the right spot. Here, starting here, starting here, episode 17, The Hacking of the American Mind, where we get in and we talk about QAnon and Trump's run in 2020 and how the Christian right supported Trump as well as the whole QAnon theory. And I go into some other stuff on social media. And really, you need to go in and hear this for yourself, because there's some great audio that I use there in order to point y'all as to how QAnon and the Christian right came together, and how this conspiracy theory of QAnon was accepted within the Christian right to the point that Christian evangelists preach this stuff in their sermons. Then coming up to Hacking the American Mind, part 2, we get into some brainwashing again of the American society, and we really get into some things about the Christian right even deeper, and Christian nationalism and how that developed, what is QAnon and that type of thing. And then episode 21, Hacking the American Mind, part 3, Dr. Robert Lustig gives us how they use advertising to hack our minds and misinform us about food products. You'll also get into how the propaganda came about, and Edward Bernays, and the father of public relation, and how he used propaganda. If you really want to know why bacon and eggs are such a popular breakfast item here in the United States, you need to go see and listen to this particular series. Episode 21, Hacking the American Mind, part 3. And then here, episode 23, American Brainwashing and Mind Control Recap. I do a recap over the whole system to lay it out for you. Now, again, if you want to understand white supremacy, this is White Supremacy 101. After you view this, you see the systems in place and how they use these systems to literally brainwash a nation, with certain programming going to white America and other programming going to Black, Brown, and Red America. And if you have not seen the series I did on the illusion of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, you need to go in and look at this. It clearly shows you the money trail of Black Lives Matter, how the organization is not being forthright in their accounting of what they have done with the $90 million they received through donations. They even go in and look at the two organizations that helped organize their fund drive and gave them the mechanism to collect this money. And you will see that they did indeed recognize they raised this money and turned this money over to the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. All right. And you will see that's where you hear about the $6 million home and the other $12 million estimated they used to buy real estate property in Los Angeles and in Atlanta. You'll get the 411 on that right here. So I want you to please go to www.therightauthority.com. and you can get this information directly for yourself. Support the channel, support the work I'm doing. Do keep in mind, I am a distributor of information, and I do this because mainstream media is corrupted. If you don't know, there's only 5 companies now that control all media here in the United States. Okay? That is television, radio, and print. 5 companies. The entertainment industry is down to 3 companies that control all music and the majority of movies being produced. 3. You put those 3 companies and the 5 media giants together, and you get the totality of all entertainment and media and news that's being presented to us here in the United States. Okay? It's very important that you guys understand this process, because without understanding this process, you will continually come up with incorrect information, and you will continually be fooled by this information. You will not ever get the truth and be on track as to what's happening in this country and around the world. The one thing you will hear me say is that we live in a very wicked society, and the source of the wickedness is the system we live under: capitalism, democracy, and imperialism. That is the source of the wickedness of this company. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I should be back with you guys in a week. And we can pick it up from there. I'm still working on my presentation for Jonestown, which will wrap up my brainwashing series. And if you did not know, Jonestown, November 18th, 1978, Jonestown was a CIA experiment gone wrong. Congressman Leo Ryan busted the whole outfit. And once that was done, they had to destroy the evidence. And that's why there was the murders and the massacre that took place in Jonestown. And that I will bring to you next week. So if you view this content, please be looking for that content to come out next week. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up.
Roger, Flight 807, approaching runway 7 Bravo.
Go ahead and bring it in and land this thing. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Again, peace and revolutionary blessings. I will see you next week.